Podcast 2.4, Combining Supply and Demand, Spring 2012. And for this podcast, I want you to keep in mind that the relationship status between supply and demand is very complicated, just like you'd put your relationship status on Facebook. They disagree, they have different motives, and, just like in a relationship, sometimes you have to come to a compromise. So the different motives between producers and consumers, which is supply and demand, are that A, producers want to make money. They want your moolah. They want your dollar. They want your hard-earned cash. Consumers, on the other hand, you're a little bit stingy with that cash. You don't necessarily want to pay them for a product unless it's good, something you want, or something you need. So that's where we have this dilemma. Producers want to make money, but they've got to earn it because you're kind of stingy with your money as a consumer. So we have this thing called equilibrium, and that's where we come to the compromise. Equilibrium is the place where supply and demand meet, where consumers decide, yeah, I'll pay you that price for that item, and producers decide, yeah, I can supply that item at that price. And it's a happy place. It's the happy point. Everyone is happy at this place of equilibrium. Okay? That's where your product is sold. So when you go to Walmart and buy the product, that's your equilibrium. Your market price that you pay for it is the place where the producer has decided to sell it and you have decided to buy it. So at the equilibrium point, you need to know that the quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demanded. Everything that is supplied is being bought if we're at equilibrium point. Equilibrium is beneficial to buyers and sellers because buyers are getting the item for the price they want, and sellers are selling the item for the price that they want to sell it for. Okay, so we already talked about this, why buyers find a price where they are willing to buy, and sellers find a price where they're willing to sell. So, great. Now we know about equilibrium. What does this really mean? Well, we gotta have a look at the graphs because equilibrium is shown on a graph just like everything else in econ. Can't have a term without a graph, right? So we've talked about the supply curve, we've talked about the demand curve, you've drawn both of them, you know that the demand curve is downward sloping to the right, you know that the supply curve is upward sloping to the right because as price goes up, supply goes up. So what we have to do then, when we put them on the same chart, is combine them. And where supply and demand meet in the middle, that's the market price. That's the place where consumers are willing to purchase the item and producers are willing to sell it. So if I ask you to find equilibrium, it's really easy. It's the place where supply and demand cross. It's the intersection. It's where X marks the spot. Okay, it's right in the middle. On a supply and demand schedule, however, it might be pretty easy to look on here and tell me where the equilibrium point is if you know that it is where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So it's going to be at $3 because that's where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Easy enough. Guess what? Life's not perfect. So just when we think equilibrium is awesome and we're in this happy place, something happens and throws us off into a disequilibrium, into some crazy situation where now suppliers are not happy again or consumers are not happy again. So we have this issue of the fact that quantity supplied is no longer equal to quantity demanded. So we have to solve the problem. In order to solve the disequilibrium problem, first we have to establish what the problems are. So the first one is a shortage. And anytime that we have a shortage, it means that there are more people who want the product than the supplier is willing to supply. So in order to get back to an equilibrium point and make it where everybody who wants the product gets it, we raise the price. And we talked about that. That's how we decide who gets items. We raise the price and whoever can afford to buy it, buys it, and whoever can't, doesn't. The other problem, the other disequilibrium problem, is called a surplus. And this is whenever we have more product out on the market than people are willing to buy. And it's usually because the price is too high or they don't like the product or whatever it is. And so in order to get that surplus out, to get rid of it, we decrease the price of those items. Okay, clearance items are a perfect example of surplus. If you go to Walmart, you know they have a clearance aisle. It's always crazy. There's always a bunch of stuff on it. All those items are surplus items. They had to mark the price down because people didn't buy them. So here's an example of what a shortage graph would look like. We have our demand curve, which is downward sloping to the right, and our supply curve, which is upward sloping to the right. And then if you notice, shortage is always graphed at a lower price than the equilibrium, okay? Because at that point, we know on our coordinates, based on how we graph, that if we go over from $2 to the supply curve, and then we go down to the quantity, then that's going to tell us how many of the item we're selling. This is for pizzas of pizza. So at $2, the producer is willing to supply 150 pieces of pizza. However, at $2, the consumers are wanting to buy 250. So we've got this excess demand of 100 slices of pizza. So we can solve this problem by raising the price and bringing it back to equilibrium. Producers will be able to supply a little bit more because they're getting a little bit more revenue, and consumers will probably want to buy less if the price goes up by $1. Here's an example of what a surplus graph looks like. A surplus is graphed where the price is higher than equilibrium, and if you notice, we go over from $4 to the demand curve here. We go down to the quantity that at $4 we are going to demand 150 pieces of pizza. If we go over from $4 to the supply curve, we find that at $4 producers are wanting to sell 250 pieces of pizza. Of course, they will want to make money. But consumers aren't really wanting to pay $4. So in order to fix the surplus, we lower the price down to $3. And here in the middle, we come to an equilibrium. Demand goes up to 200, and supply goes down to 200. And we have an equilibrium point at $3 and 200. Shortage, we already said, requires a price increase, and surplus requires a price decrease. You got to make sure you remember that. That's going to be important. So our final thought for this podcast is that consumers want to save money that producers are trying to make. Conflict seems inevitable until we find equilibrium or compromise. And we're going to be graphing this equilibrium point for the rest of Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. You guys are going to be graphing these equilibrium points, and you're going to be showing and explaining how the market reached equilibrium and why it changed to begin with. So make sure that you understand what equilibrium is, and if you have any questions, you can always ask me in class. Until next time.